But nonetheless, here we are. So this is week two. Week one covered the first three chapters, and that dealt with folk music and early country music and early blues music up until the electric blues of the 1940s. So the electric blues being post World War II, which ended in 1943, 44, depending on the country, really. But for us, it's around 1944. And what we're going to do tonight is start with chapter four and talk about the emergence of popular music in America and just show how the different things that contributed to the birth of popular music. So we have technology, different business and marketing tools that were employed, various things like that, and hopefully you get a clear picture of how early popular music was before the Second World War. And then we'll jump into jazz for chapter five, and I'll just give an overview of some of the main styles and a couple of the key players and musicians in jazz. And then chapter six will deal with mostly I guess the popular music after the Second World War, and we'll stop. I guess the year will be sometime around the early 50s. I think is as far as we'll get. So in the first week, in last week, we talked about, if you watch the archive, it mentions how country music, particularly, well, actually, all of these different cultural influences played a large role on various styles of music. So the British Isles music, the music that immigrants from Ireland and Scotland and the UK, the music that they brought with them to America when they immigrated to the States, was held on to, and that helped to develop the early country music, the string bands and the fiddle music, and a lot of the melodies that we hear in early country music, as well as early folk music. The European classical tradition, this just the classical music that when you think of people like Mozart and Haydn, and maybe even later Beethoven, would influence how songwriters and composers and musicians wrote and performed music in the popular realm. So we have this bleeding through and this kind of crossing over between these different influences. The African American influence is very, very prominent. We'll discuss that in more detail when we get to jazz in a few minutes. But when we discussed blues last week, we saw how heavily the African American influence was, and how much it contributed to American popular music. If I haven't emphasized this enough yet, I would just want to say that blues music is central to so many developments of popular music styles. We hear the blues chord progression in just about every style of music, even through today. So that's at the minimum influence that blues has had on popular styles of music. And so we hear the blues in early country music being a key influence in early country music, believe it or not. And in jazz, blues is kind of the backbone of a lot of jazz music. And then we have the regional style. So we have to remember that different pockets of the United States, different regional pockets and areas, kind of had their own sound and their own styles emerge from them. So we learned that blues music has Piedmont blues, so that comes from the Piedmont region. It stretches from the middle part of Georgia through the northern New Jersey, maybe touching New York a little bit. So we have all of those states in between that comprise the Piedmont region. So the Piedmont blues style came from there, and Delta blues. So that comes from the Mississippi Delta. If we think about regional styles in country music, we have different styles that come from different parts of Texas. We have Western swing and honky tonk, and then the Appalachian area, which mixed a heavy dose of folk music with a more conservative sound of the old time country sound. So with Jimmy Rogers, we have this very eclectic kind of like city like kind of more urbane sounding than the Carter family, who was discussed last week. So the Carter family, being from Appalachia, was more conservative a little bit. So we have those two important strains of music, both coming from two different regions. So just keep in mind the regions where these styles come from uh, play a large role. So it really, it depends on where this style of music is emerging out of, that determines the sound. So just to reiterate from last week, so now we get into some early the early business and marketing of popular music. So this is an important slide. This is showing the role of the United States in popular music, pretty much just saying like what we borrowed a lot of technology from other people from other countries. The magnetophone, we'll discuss that later, was a German invention for the Second World War under pretty much Hitler's regime. But what we can say that we contributed to this popular music in the early years was the idea of publishing. So owning, copywriting your music, owning it, and being able to distribute it freely, and then so the main technological developments that we have in America would be the Thomas Edison's phonograph, Emil Berliner's gramophone, Alexander Graham Bell's graphophone, but mostly we look to Thomas Edison's phonograph, and we'll discuss that in a little bit more detail later. And then we have this diverse population that starts to emerge that is kind of coincides with this emerging middle class that has a little bit more leisure time than previous generations and more disposable income, and that will continue to grow into the 50s, with America being pretty much one of the most prosperous countries to come out of the Second World War. So that's just a brief kind of bullet points there. And then our main streams of distribution being live performance and sheet music. So we have theater, and then just live performance is just kind of general playing maybe in whatever venue or club or bar you could, or barrel house or whatever you could get into, and then sheet music. So we have to remember that this is before recording technology was developed and before it caught on, really. The only way to hear music before that was to either play it yourself, play it for people, or to go out and hear it played live. You couldn't just put on a record and listen to whatever you wanted, and you certainly couldn't just pull up the internet and choose any song that you wanted to hear at that specific moment. You had to kind of be selective if you wanted to go see a live. Really, at the time, it would be some form of classical music, unless you have just these little get-togethers that have maybe family bands or string bands playing in a live setting. So we touched on that last week when we talked about the folk process and how the folk process is it's dealing with oral transmission rather than written transmission, and that's like the folk process is it's it can't exist without live performance. It has to be passed down from generation to generation uh, through the word of mouth. So it has to be this kind of oral transmission, and um, that's in contrast to written music, right? So if we have a piece of sheet music that is notated note for note, and we read that, we know exactly what that person is wanting us to play. We know exactly how they want us to play it, pretty much. So there'll be some differences in the interpretation, maybe, or the performance and execution of reading sheet music, but for the most part, it's pretty literal. And that's really the segue into recorded music. Sheet music is the bridge between just kind of singing on your own from memory to the like definitive recording that we get when we have with the emergence of the phonograph and things like that can record things and set them in stone. Basically, there's no question as to how how that music should sound. If the composer says that's a great performance that we just recorded, then that's kind of the consensus. Stephen Foster was he's the guy who really started what we call the popular music song form, the pop music song form. So did you guys have to do some kind of discussion post on the pop song form in Music Theory 1, I think? Yeah, so Stephen Foster is the guy who really solidified that. Uh, and he sold more sheet music than any other songwriter at the time. So this is sheet music at this time was basically like vinyl records or CDs or cassette tapes or 8 tracks. If you guys have ever seen one of those, that's what sheet music was for people before recording technology. So there had to be a way to market it, to sell it, to sort of just to package it and get it out to people. The person who sold the most of these sheet music in general was Stephen Foster. So we see these songs here. You guys probably recognize a couple of these titles. Stephen Foster wrote "Oh Susanna." He wrote "Camptown Races." If you don't recognize the title, you probably would recognize the song once you hear it. "Old Folks at Home," "My Kentucky Home," and so on and so forth. So what I want to do is play you guys some Stephen Foster, or I want to show you how the folk process kind of worked with Stephen Foster with his song "Oh Susanna." So this is right. This is one of the most famous songs in the world. Everyone has heard this at some point or another in their lives. So just try to apply the folk process that we talked about last week. Apply that to the songs you're about to hear, the music you're going to hear right now. So let's jump into the sound drop room. And I'm going to play a couple of different versions of "Oh Susanna," just so you can hear how diverse the different musicians were in arranging this song in different ways. So they weren't trying to stick to the exact same sound. It just kind of progressed and evolved into different different forms, different. You hear different instrumentation and different arrangements, but the core is still there. You can still listen to it and say that's "Oh Susanna," and even the melody might be a little bit different, but you can, even if the lyrics weren't there to help you out, you would still be able to identify that as being the "Oh Susanna" song. So this is just to reiterate the folk process. Um, let's see. Here we go. Oh, Daryl, all your caps lock is on. Um, there's a link in the materials section in the Go to Training panel that takes you step by step on how to get to the sound drop room. And there's a link inside of that document. If you already have the sound drop room, then there's the link right there. You can just click that. So Stephen Foster, the guy who pretty much solidified the pop song form. Now, Tin Pan Alley is this is when sheet music explodes, and this is when I guess in terms of business and industry, this is when it really gets to be sophisticated. Tin Pan Alley is just the name given to this location that you see here in this picture. These music publishers moved into these studio apartments or these offices that were located just pretty much across the street from where Broadway theater and musicals and things like that was happening. And at the time, like I said, we're still kind of pre recording, right? Pre sound recording, and the way to really sell your music was to get somebody to perform it. That was because otherwise it's not even going to be heard. If it's not performed, it's just not heard. So these music publishers, you can see several of them here. I know there's at least 4 on this one picture. So they moved to near to where these Broadways were taking place, and they would try to sell their music to the Broadway companies. And then what do you know? The composers and songwriters moved right next door into the same buildings as the music publishers, because the songwriters were worried about getting published, and the publishers were worried about getting whatever songs that they published heard and performed and bought. So it worked that way. I mean, people just they migrated to where the greatest opportunity was to get their music sold and heard. And we have these people who were known as song pluggers, who were basically like the Avon ladies, or the like if you ever had like Mary Kay, or maybe some salesman shows up to your door trying to sell you anything, a vacuum cleaner or what have you. That's what song pluggers were. They traveled from home to home, just knocking on people's doors with a box of sheet music, and they would ask for a minute of their time. Hopefully that household had a piano, so that the song pluggers could sit by the piano and play the music to just try to sell it and market it a little bit, and try to get the potential buyers interested. And they would just pull out whatever type of music that they thought might interest the potential buyers, and they're called song pluggers for that reason. So like I said, at this time you had to really do this kind of just in the grassroots way, just knocking on people's doors, just kind of doing just house to house sort of thing. All right, so I know this first part might move a little quickly, guys. So vaudeville, this is where. So they were performing a lot of the sheet music that the music publishers were putting out, right? So these were kind of the acts that those music publishers wanted to perform their music, and these were the people who transitioned from live theater sort of thing to becoming the first recorded pop music stars and the first music stars on radio and the first music stars on TV. They came from the vaudeville tradition, and we learned about that in week one with the city blues singers, the blues queens, Ma Rainey and Mamie Smith and Ida Cox, Alberta Hunter, Bessie Smith. The city blues singers came from vaudeville, and the music that backed them was this type of jazz, this New Orleans jazz. But this is the kind of ensemble you would see at a typical sort of like a vaudeville performance. And this picture is significant because it shows the drummer with a bass drum and a snare drum. So what's odd about the drums here? What strikes you as kind of odd, maybe? Everything. All right. Well, let's try to be a little bit more specific. So no cymbals. Okay. Yeah. Good. Good. The kick drum is massive. That's what I'm getting at, really. This was a concert bass drum. It's not a kick drum at this point, right? At this early in the game, it's not yet called a kick drum. It's just a concert bass, and even marching bass drums were just about as big as this, right? So we have these huge bass drums, and this is before the formation of a drum set. In its early years, it was called the trap set because it kind of trapped surrounded the drummer and kind of trapped him into this little pocket so he could play each drum and cymbal. So, but if it's before the creation of a drum set, the snare has a really sharp angle. Yeah. Now the reason it's angled like that is because drummers really played in with that traditional grip with the left hand stick kind of in between the fingers rather than playing it just by gripping it like you would a hammer or something. It's just kind of like sitting in between your ring finger and your middle finger. Traditional grip, yeah, exactly. So it makes it a little easier. We have all these things that are starting to move from the marching band into popular music bands and the way that they would formate their ensembles. So if this is before the invention of a drum set, how was this drummer hitting the bass drum? It's really traditionally used mallets or some kind of stick to hit the bass drum traditionally, but what was he doing to make a sound out of the bass drum? He's not using a pedal. So his foot. All right. So now we know why it's called a kick drum, because he's just kicking the head of this massively huge bass drum. But so then we get, eventually kick drum catches on. Yeah. So this is a neat little piece of trivia there. Here on the right are some of the big names in vaudeville performance who would carry over into, like I said, recorded music, radio, and TV. Eddie Cantor, Al Jolson, the Three Stooges, the Marx Brothers, Milton Berle. So Eddie Cantor he's pretty interesting. He worked closely with with a guy named Flo Siegfried, And Siegfried had these things called the Siegfried Follies, that became a huge hit for reviews, or what they were called. We'll talk about that in the next slide. But Eddie Cantor worked closely with Flo Siegfried, and Eddie Cantor became so he came from this Broadway uh, performance, and that was the first like 30 or so years in the early 1900s. And then by like 1931 or 1932, he transitions into radio and becomes the highest paid radio star of the time, and is really just kind of singing out these like comedy sketches basically, and using his acting skills to just enhance the experience. He worked primarily with NBC, and actually another little piece of trivia: the song "Santa Claus is Coming to Town" was originally sang by Eddie Cantor, the first person to record that song, to sing it. But the story is, the guy who wrote it, this guy named Fred Coots, J. Fred Coots, and Haven Gillespie were trying to get this song recorded by many other, like they asked many other people. Everyone turned it down except Eddie Cantor, and it becomes one of the most recorded and performed songs still to this day. Milton Berle, the guy on the bottom, is so the Three Stooges. We know them. The Marx Brothers are basically an imitation of the Three Stooges. Milton Berle he's known as Mr. Television, or he used to be anyway. So this is during TV's golden age, the late 40s through the early 60s, so a little over a decade. The 50s are kind of like the golden age of TV, and he was called Mr. Television. Why was he called Mr. Television? He had this show called the Texaco Star Theater Show, which originally aired in 1948, and it was aired on Tuesday nights, and it completely dominated Tuesday night TV, and it was so popular. We have there were these things called the Nielsen ratings, and the Nielsen ratings indicated that 80% of the viewing audience tuned in every Tuesday night to watch Milton Berle's Texaco Star Theater Show. So it became so popular that movie theaters would shut down, or they would go out of business for that. They would just wouldn't sell tickets during that time on Tuesday nights. Restaurants and just every other kind of business would just pretty much shut down for that hour or so that they could watch the Milton Berle show. And it wasn't just so that the owners could watch the show. It was because nobody came, no patrons were coming out to support their restaurants or their businesses. Everyone stayed home so they could watch this Texaco Star Theater Show. Interesting point is that an investigation took place in Detroit because the water levels were so low between the times 9 and 9:05 p.m. Water levels dropped significantly, and an investigation was held in Detroit to try to find out why were water levels dropping so much during this time. But 9 p.m. was when the show ended, right? So between 9 p.m. and 9:05 p.m., everyone waited to go to the bathroom until after the show because they didn't want to miss a single second. So they wait till after the show to relieve themselves, right? And so that's how popular this show was. This is early TV. This is one of the first hugely just huge TV stars, Milton Berle. And after this show, we see the sale of TVs rising to about double what they were in the past. And by 1949, over 2 million TVs were sold. And a lot of credit needs to be given to the Mr. TV here, Mr. Television, Milton Berle. So Other forms of entertainment, that was vaudeville, and those guys were originally vaudeville performers. So we have operetta, burlesque, and reviews. Operetta is it's just light. It comes from the opera comique that was developed in the late classical and early romantic period, and that was just it just means light opera. So it's not really like as serious as a lot of the content of operas by Verdi or Puccini. This is kind of just like a good feel type of opera, and they're significantly shorter. There's a comic element to them. The music is also more, I guess, accessible and not as deep or what have you. It's more just kind of light, and operetta grows out of opera comique and becomes a form of theatrical entertainment just before the big recording boom and the big boom of the music industry. Burlesque and reviews are essentially the same thing. They're practically, they touch on a lot of the same themes. um, Burlesque shows deal with the kind of like they satirize a lot of kind of political situations that are going on at the time. It's kind of like a parody of a lot of stuff. We have this Bon Ton burlesquers. Every time I see Bon Ton, I think of True Blood. I don't know if you guys have seen that show, but there's a town. I don't know if it's a made up town or if it's a real town in Louisiana, but it's Bon Ton, is like the place where the show set. Anyway, burlesque is just kind of a parody, satirical, um, and it had a kind of a form that held on. There's like this three-part form that you would kind of see when you went to watch a burlesque show. Uh, so the first part would just be this just singing of comedic songs, just getting the audience in the mood and kind of lightening the feel, and then the second part would go into this huge spectacle of if you know like Cirque du Soleil, just acrobatics and magicians and then solo singers, just this big sort of spectacle that takes place, and that's kind of the heart of the show. And then it ends with just like a one or two chorus numbers where everyone's singing about various politics of the day, and the big finale being um, uh, some kind of boxing or wrestling match. So maybe you went to go see the boxing match, but you showed up a little early and you got warmed up by watching some burlesque entertainment. But usually it was I want to go see some of the acrobats and the magicians and the performers, and then just to top it off, I might stay and watch a couple of rounds of boxing. So these the boxing matches, if they were like if it was a big ticket, then of course the burlesque show is going to be a little bit shorter, and the boxing match is going to be the main attraction. Let's see, what do we have? A couple questions. Oh, never mind. That was from the kick drum. And then let's see, the reviews are. This is I talked about Eddie Cantor performing with Flo Ziegfeld. The Ziegfeld Follies is what it is. See the spelling right here. Sorry for that. So Eddie Cantor performs with Flo Ziegfeld and his Ziegfeld Follies, and this is a type of review, which is just theater, dance, and music. The same type of thing, except it might not be as risque as burlesque, but it was kind of, I guess, this was more of a upper tier, kind of upper class attraction. You had to pay a little bit more to see a review, and they still kind of had the risque uh, uh, outfits worn by the girls. But so Mr. Ziegfeld, he would charge about $5 for opening night tickets, which converts in 2008 currency to $106. So people are paying the equivalent of $106 for opening night review. So, like I said, kind of more, I guess, just more sophisticated. So here are the origins of recording. So now we can talk about a couple of the most important pieces of recording technology. Thomas Edison. So there's this kind of a race that we see a lot with these big inventions that take place. The same sort of pocket of scientists and inventors know a lot of the same stuff. They share information. They're keeping up with each other, reading different things, reading a lot of the same things, trying to just compete and keep up with each other. So there's always this sort of race to the finish. Who can get this patented, or who can get this, who can really make this marketable and sell a million or 2 million. And Thomas Edison just happened to be the guy who gets his gets a prototype for sound recording, a workable prototype that catches on. But we got to give him credit. We can't. I'm not trying to discredit him, but there were people before him who were making similar attempts. But the irony of it all is, we know the phonograph as being this early device, the first type of device that captures sound and can play a recording repeatedly, and we can listen to a recorded song, whenever we want, at any time, and potentially at any place if we can move around the phonograph, depending on if it's portable or not. His original goal wasn't to record music. That was a little bit down on his list. There's another invention at around the same time. So this is 1877. Around the same time, we have another invention that deals with sound. What might that be? What do you think what's this other and very important invention at around the same time that still deals with sound and the transmission of sound? Any takers? The phone. Yeah, Alexander Graham Bell invents the telephone, and so Graham Bell was right there with Edison and patenting some kind of device to record sound, but Edison just had the better prototype. But Alexander Graham Bell invents the phone, and Edison, the phone takes off like that. I mean, why wouldn't it? You don't have to deal with the kind of clumsy and clunky telegraphs and things like that, typing in Morse codes and stuff. Thomas Edison thinks that he's gonna come up with this device that will capture sound, and specifically that it will record anything that's coming through Alexander Graham Bell's telephone. And what does that sound like? So he's trying to record what's coming through the telephone, to just kind of, permanently have this recording. What does that sound like? Anything familiar? If we record the sound, voicemail, yeah. And what about what's before voicemail? This might be. Does anyone remember what came before voicemail? Oh no. Um, so what was before voicemail? If you just use a regular telephone, right? Answering machine. Yeah. So that's what he's trying to do, is to create an answering machine. But it just turns out to be the machine that people use to record music. But that was a little bit far from his mind. He thought that first it would be a great dictation device. So answering machine was number one on his list. He just wanted to piggyback on Graham Bell's success, pretty much. And then also things like if you're in court, you can just you can record whatever the testimony is and the questions and answers and stuff like that. You don't have to have someone writing it down or typing it. Um, uh, so there's this whole list of things that he thought that the phonograph would be used for, but music was a little bit down on his list. So how does this thing work? This is the this little this is a cylinder. This would be called a cylinder recorder, because what we're doing is well, no, I'm sorry, I take that back. A cylinder recorder is actually recording onto a cylinder, some kind of like a wax or metal cylinder. What you would do to record with this is wrap a piece of tinfoil around this thing that looks like a Campbell soup can. You just wrap a piece of tinfoil around it, and then there's a little needle behind this little barrel here, and whatever sound is transmitted. If you speak, you pretty much got to yell. You had to be pretty loud to get the needle to etch into the tinfoil, but you wrap the tinfoil around this can, and then the needle etches the sound wave patterns into these grooves, and then then once it's recorded, you crank it all the way up with this handle here, and let it go, and it plays it in reverse. So really, Alexander Graham Bell came up with that idea before Edison. He found out that you could play, like he was playing piano notes, and it was the sound patterns were vibrating in the air, and he had it etched with like ink, with a needle with ink, and it was writing this pattern on a piece of paper. So it took him a little bit to think of this, and it's still kind of, how does this happen? But he discovered that whatever sound pattern that you record, you can just play it backwards, and it reproduces the sound, so it plays it back. But Graham Bell was the one who really came up with that first. So I just tried to open my calendar, which is a mistake. And then we have Emil Berliner's gramophone. So what does this look like? And just think of the word gramophone. Have you seen this? This is in popular culture in an event that deals specifically with music. Yeah, Grammy. So that's the Grammy logos are taken from the gramophone. So this is the first successful flat disc recorder. So now you can see right here, there's this actual disc. We're not just recording on tinfoil. It's a metal plate, and then eventually they'll use different forms of just material, plastic or well, just different types of metal, and then eventually we'll get into wax. But it works kind of the same way. You this is your input, this big bell here. You record, you play the music into that, sing into that, and then you wind it up, and then this actually may play in reverse automatically, but it looks like this little handle here is to wind it back up and to play it back. So you can build your own playback device with just household items. If you have a needle, just like a sewing needle, and if you have maybe like a plastic, like a cylinder shaped piece of Tupperware, or some kind of plastic cylinder shape, and if you puncture a hole in the bottom of that container, that plastic container, and stick the needle down very, very tight and kind of snug, and get a record. And maybe you can you can do this on a record player really easily. Just play the record, but don't put the needle on it. But put your needle with the little plastic piece of Tupperware. Put it down just gently on the record, and sound will come out of that piece of plastic Tupperware. You can get like takeout or something. Just wash it out and puncture the needle down through the bottom of that, and sound pops out. It's very faint, but you can hear it. So that's the next important step: is how do you amplify the sound that's coming through? You had to use either a big bell at first without using any kind of transistor or any kind of vacuum tube or something to amplify it. So that would be the next step. So we have these two gentlemen here, Nikola Tesla and Guglielmo Marconi, or Guglielmo Marconi. I don't know how to pronounce his first name. I'll be honest. But so Tesla worked closely with Thomas Edison, and Thomas Edison actually brought Tesla in. Tesla looked up to Edison for a while, but they soon become pretty big rivals, because what happens is Edison actually offers Tesla a big chunk of change so Edison's trying to figure out this problem, this electrical problem, and Tesla says, no, there's a very simple solution. And then Edison just kind of laughs. He's like, okay, whatever. If you can find a solution, then I'll give you X amount of dollars, like a large sum of money. And Tesla comes back a couple of days later, and then Edison, it works, right? So Tesla fixed the problem, but Edison never pays him. He just says, thanks, good job, get back to work, and uses Tesla's discovery. So Andrew says the AC/DC war, absolutely. So then that's what really kind of sparks this. That's the seed of the rivalry, and then Tesla moves on to do his own research and work. And Edison is there's an Edison and Westinghouse rivalry. It's called the War of the Currents, and this is in the 1880s. So Andrew, yeah, exactly right. Tesla's on the AC side of the war, alternating current, and then Edison's on the DC side of this so-called War of the Currents. But Tesla's really, the reason I have him here is because he's such an important figure in the development of wireless technology. He was in the late 1800s. He's able to broadcast signals wirelessly across the Atlantic Ocean, and that's really his claim to fame. And Marconi, he is largely credited as being the inventor of the radio, so we have to put him here somewhere. Both of these guys worked with long distance radio transmission, wireless transmission, to just get signals from one place to another. And Marconi is the radio guy, inventor of the radio. Tesla is the wireless guy. So just keep that in mind. And then this slide just shows you the two big, the first big major record labels, Columbia and Victor. There were other independent, kind of smaller labels. We have OK Records, and this picture really just shows you Emil Berliner's gramophone, which Victor. So Berliner worked with the Victor recording company for a while, and actually just kind of quit or left, and then they bought his patent. That's what happened. So Victor buys out Berliner basically and buys his patent for the gramophone, and they there's this iconic image here of the dog looking into the bell of the gramophone, and he's hearing his dead owner's voice coming through a recording. So he's just, and it's so we call it his master's voice, but we see that on all of the early Victor recordings. Okay, the Great American Songbook is just a collection of canonical songs. So what I mean by canonical, just representative and very important and influential pieces of music. So we would put, like, in the classical music canon, we have things like Mozart, or let's see, well, Mozart's some of his operas, The Marriage of Figaro, and Beethoven's For Elise, and his Fifth Symphony, and the Moonlight Sonata, and Bach's The Art of Fugue. Things like that, would be canonical. They're just that important and influential. A journalist writing in the 70s coined the term the Great American Songbook to refer to these songwriters who wrote fantastic music in the 30s through the 50s, essentially. And so, yeah, the term was coined in 1972. So just kind of a made up term to just categorize these fantastic songs. And here's a list of many of them, several of them, with some of the biggest names who wrote these songs. So Irving Berlin. Some people say, Irving Berlin is the American Songbook, that people after him just kind of followed in followed his lead and tried to live up to what he did. He wrote White Christmas. So we don't really see his name because he doesn't perform White Christmas, obviously. We have all these different people who are performing the song White Christmas. So at this time, the songwriters are more important, more popular, right? They're more known than the actual performers. So at this time in the 30s, 40s, it's in a lot of cases, credit was given to the songwriters. It wasn't just the performers. That's kind of flipped a few times since then. Today, we're still living in the sort of performer arena, I guess. Just we get more credit, or the performers are the ones who get the attention. So that's what I'm trying to say. But during this time of the Great American Songbook writers, credit was given to the songwriter. So White Christmas is the most sold song ever. It sold more copies than any other song, and it may well be the most covered song than any other song in the world. And that's because it's seasonal. It's a great song, right? But it also is re-recorded many times every year around Christmas. But that definitely contributed to its success. But nonetheless, it's just an interesting piece of trivia. The most sold song, Georgia on My Mind. So Ray Charles made that song famous for another generation, or actually just not too far off the. Well, no, this was recorded in the 30s, early 30s. Georgia on My Mind actually was published by Ralph Peer. So we talked about Ralph Peer in week 1. So Georgia on My Mind was another one of Ralph Peer's, I guess, another one of his great achievements. Duke Ellington, the great swing band leader, he knew each of his players' personalities and ways of performing, and he would orchestrate his music um, uh, so that it would match the way that his each performer played and how they played. Genius. I mean, usually you just have composers say, "I'm going to write it how I want it," and you play it how it's written. But he knew that those nuances and idiosyncrasies would come out if he wrote for the specific performers. So we have it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. It's a classic. George and Ira Gershwin, "Summertime" is one of just a great song. They are known for Porgy and Bess. This it's the first African American opera, or just the first kind of opera written and based on African American music and traditions. Then we'll talk about Scott Joplin, the ragtime piano player who wrote a couple operas, but he's borrowing largely from classical music and the kind of white European tradition. But with Porgy and Bess, the George Gershwin, it really makes a fantastic sort of composition out of that. And then Cole Porter, Rodgers and Hart, and Hammerstein. So it would either be Rodgers and Hart or Rodgers and Hammerstein. They wrote some of the most iconic musicals. I guess we'll listen to a couple of these songs since we haven't really listened to much since Oh Susanna. Let's see. I'll just put in Nat King Cole's Stardust. Okay, so fantastic singer. Just kind of an example of the Great American Songbook. You have several of these on your listening list for this week. Okay, so I guess I could have waited to play that song to finish it out. I think this is our last slide before our break here. Excuse me. So we have these radio stations. Sorry, that obviously do so much to promote the music that's coming out, and that's where a lot of these early songwriters gain their success. And the popular music industry, and even at the beginning when classical music is still in vogue, is boosted by these record labels playing these radio stations playing their music. So we have kind of a popular music takeover after a few years with like old time and hillbilly music being broadcast in Georgia and in Pennsylvania and Texas and different places, Nashville, and it kind of starts to take over the airwaves, and people want to hear popular music. And then by the time we get to the 30s, with a lot of the Great American Songbook writers, the Irving Berlins and the Cole Porters, their music is really saturates these airwaves. So what happens is RCA creates NBC, and then Columbia creates the Columbia Broadcasting Station. But here's the key point. So there's a monopoly with these radio stations to prevent a monopoly from occurring, which is what kind of the law is. The NBC is it puts out this ABC station. So this is ABC is the radio station that is created to prevent a monopoly from occurring, and that's the main point here with that slide. So let's go ahead and take a break, and then we'll get into jazz. And we'll try to wrap it up by 9:30. I'm hoping at the latest. So just take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll meet back at 8:16. So I'll see you then. All right, take care. Good night. All right, so this is chapter 5, deals with jazz. So it's just going to be a quick overview of the main styles and the some of the main musicians that contributed to jazz. So we're going to start with New Orleans. This is where jazz is born in New Orleans, Louisiana. It was just right for this kind of music to develop because jazz is a mixture of so many different different types of music from different cultures. And in New Orleans at the time, at the turn of the 20th century, so we're talking late 1800s, early 1900s. If you just look at this map here, we have, so New Orleans is this it's a port city, so all this trade was taking place, and a lot of the countries were they were exporting their goods into New Orleans because it was just a massive port city. It still is, and we have a lot of settlers who decide to just stay in New Orleans, and we have this kind of, a lot of people, they call America this melting pot. And that's kind of what New Orleans was for sure. We have Irish, and then all types of sort of mixed cultures, Polish, Chinese, African American. The African American community was quite spread out throughout the entire area that you see on this map here. But you can just look Greek. What else do we have here? German, and just all sorts of different kind of mixtures of cultures taking place. And then the French White Creole, so Creole, the Creole culture you see here, it's just that's just referring to pretty much primarily French and African American mixed, and they developed their kind of own sort of customs, and even their language was a little bit mixed between English, African, and French, and this Creole culture played a large role in starting a lot of the early jazz that we'll see that will come out of New Orleans. So there's this mixture of African American music, and European classical music, and then eventually we have the Caribbean elements that will come in. But first, let's just focus on European classical forms and African American forms. What aspects? So yeah, Congo Square was, Daryl mentions Congo Square. That's where African Americans at the time where they were allowed to sort of congregate and play music and have this just kind of festivities and things like that. And that was just kind of a gathering place for the African American community at the time. Daryl, I don't know. You may be right. I was under the impression that it was first called jazz with two S's instead of two Z's, and then it was later changed to the two Z's. I think because people were just misprinting it, misspelling it. But I'll have to look into that. So, what aspects of let's just start with just kind of classical music, the stuff that you're learning in music theory, essentially. What element? This just goes with popular music in general. What classical music elements can you think of that would contribute to jazz? What types of things like that you're learning in music theory can you think of that might be that was incorporated into this jazz music? If we think of it like this, different cultures have their own ways of writing and creating music. So a lot of different cultures around the world use different tuning scales and different ways of constructing harmony and applying melody. So scales, yeah, and chords. So it was really like the harmonic structure of European classical music. Seventh chords definitely will absolutely seventh, and then the extended chords, the ninth chords, 11th chords, and 13th chords, even. So exactly these extended chords, extended harmonies. So yeah, the harmony. And so, for example, we tune our instruments in the West, in the Western Hemisphere, pretty much. Um, in Western music and Western society, we have this specific type of tuning that we use is called equal temperament tuning, and that's what you play. If you play a piano that's just recently tuned, maybe you're going to hear equal temperament, and it's just dividing the octave into 12 semitones, or which is the same thing as half steps, right? So just dividing the octave into 12 half steps. In other cultures, though, they have just intonation tuning, which doesn't use that same method. It the With equal temperament, you had to use your ear, and some of the intervals and the relationships and the tunings are a little off. At least if you so say you had like some kind of sine wave generator, frequency generator, and you said you wanted if you're trying to make say a minor third with equal temperament, it's just a guess. You're just kind of using your ear to figure out, what the closest you can get to a minor third that you can achieve while making it sound in tune with the rest of the piano and the rest of the octaves on the piano. With just intonation, if you wanted to make a minor third with just intonation, you would have the exact like exact number, exact frequency. With just intonation, you use simple ratios, so you don't have these decimals like 2.865 2888. With just intonation, it's just two. You have the relationships and the fractions are perfect, they're exact, but with our system it's a little off. So that's one aspect. So we have equal temperament, we have the harmony that's built from equal temperament, and then all of the intervals and the major thirds and the perfect fourths and perfect fifths and all that stuff that we learn about is incorporated into jazz. And so some elements of African music that is taken into account with jazz music. What can we think of? Maybe think of some of the stuff you learned about in the blues lecture. So I have here African drumming, and when you think about drumming, what's the main sort of aspect of drumming, the main element, the main musical element that drumming contributes? And Tone hit the nail on the head with syncopation. So syncopation that's one of the key elements that makes jazz what it is. So syncopation is emphasizing the offbeats. So not sticking strictly to the 1, 2, 3, 4. It's emphasizing the things in between that kind of happen in between those. Like if you've learned to count 16th notes as one E and then syncopation is going to accent the E's and the uhs. Right? It's going to kind of be the emphasis is going to just fall in between a straight, rigid beat. So just things like that, just kind of just kind of like hops around in a way. So what I did just now is another element of jazz, and this is one of the most important elements of jazz. So I played a little thing there, but I didn't have. I mean, I just did it on the spot. So what do we call that? You just play something on the spot. Improvisation. So jazz has to have improvisation and syncopation. Those are the two main elements of jazz: improvisation and syncopation. And then later, the Caribbean and different Latin American types of music will be incorporated, but that's a little bit farther down the road here. At least in an obvious way, like when we have these Latin percussion instruments that come into play with Latin jazz and the sort of indigenous dance musics in Latin America, the rumba and the cha-cha-cha. All right, so we talked about how in that one slide when we saw the drummer with that huge bass drum and with no cymbals, and the snare drum was very tilted. That band, that was kind of like a reduction of a marching band. So here's a picture, a very blurry picture actually, of a marching band in New Orleans. And marching bands is still an integral part of New Orleans culture, and you still have people who follow the bands as they walk down the street, who kind of just flank the bands, and those people are called collectively as the second line, and that's just pretty much they're trying to just gather with the bands and be a part of it. So marching band cultures, it was hugely ingrained into the New Orleans area, and the point is, early jazz ensembles took their instrumentation from marching band instrumentation. So we can see a trombone here, or several of them, right? We got tubas, we have trumpets. You can't really see, but they're there. Here's a guy, I think he's playing a trumpet. In the back, you can maybe if I zoom out, you might be able to see a little better. There's a guy playing some cymbals, crash cymbals. So he has one cymbal in each hand and just crashing them together. So there's a whole drum line, just a bass drum, a snare drum, and crash cymbals. All of that was so one of each really would make up an early jazz band. One trombone, one trumpet, one tuba, and then all the percussion would be grouped together: the bass drum, the snare, and the cymbals. And it would just one percussion player would play all of those, and that's when we get the first drum set, just combining those instruments. And then again, kicking the bass drum, that huge marching bass drum, with your foot is where we get the idea of a kick drum. And then the tuba would be replaced by a stand-up bass player eventually. But this is the very early stages of jazz. So this is before jazz is really jazz, with these early marching band formations. And you have so Philip Sousa, John Philip Sousa is when you hear, if you think about early marching band music, then John Philip Sousa is the name you need to know. he's just the most influential, the most successful marching band composer and conductor. So we have the same instruments using jazz, and this transitions into ragtime and the first jazz combos. So ragtime, being largely a piano-based music, can be converted into a marching band guise, and you can have a marching band still play in the form of ragtime, and that happened a lot. And that type of just syncopation, right, that we hear in ragtime, started by Scott Joplin, or at least popularized by Scott Joplin, combined those classical music and African music elements that we were just talking about, and that combination gave us ragtime. And then ragtime would be played by the marching bands, and then those instruments I was talking about would be picked out of the marching band, and you would have just a group of guys playing in this kind of syncopated way, using those marching band instruments. So Scott Joplin popularizes ragtime. He's known mostly for the song Maple Leaf Rag, or the piece Maple Leaf Rag, and also the piece of music called The Entertainer. It's on your listening list. And then, like I said earlier, he wrote full-scale operas, so he was classically trained and all that stuff, and was able to actually compose these large-scale operas. The only one that survives is this one called Treemonisha. But just a very important person, specifically because he is the one who really popularized ragtime. And then that syncopation that comes from ragtime will be carried over into these early ensembles, and this is where we get the very first jazz bands. This is the very first type of the very first type of jazz music. So we call it New Orleans jazz, pretty much because it came out of New Orleans. It's also called Dixieland jazz, and it's also called hot jazz. So those three terms are interchangeable. They're referring to the same type of music. So eventually some experimentation takes place, and we have what's known as polyphonic improvisation. So do you guys know the term monophonic? Maybe even know the term polyphonic, but it'll be easier to describe if you know what monophonic means. So let's dissect this term. Mono means one, yeah, so one part at a time. So you can have 1,000 musicians, but they're all singing the same thing. They're all singing the exact same thing, and that's monophonic. So it could be one person or 1,000 people, but if they're singing or playing the same thing, just one melody, then that's monophonic. And then polyphonic, meaning more than one, right? Just multiple. Then we have more than one melodies interweaving in and out of each other. So that's what New Orleans jazz was. That's the main thing. So this is going to be on your listening quiz. New Orleans jazz has this collective improvisation, more than one people soloing at a time, or you hear these multiple melodies, distinct melodies, not the same melody, but different melodies being played at the same time. The trumpet player is going to play one melody, the trombone player is going to play another melody, and they're just going to move in and out of each other. So the original Dixieland Jazz Band, the only reason I have them up here is because they are the ones who recorded the first, they were the first to record a jazz song. So you might want to look that up if you're interested in that. But Buddy Bolden, there's not a lot known about him, but the main thing that we can take from Buddy Bolden and his life or his contribution to jazz is this thing called the Big Four beat. And this is an example of syncopation becoming dominant in jazz. So if we look at these two measures of notation, what makes it syncopated? It's a couple of things that we can point to say if that wasn't there, then it wouldn't really be syncopated. Any takers? So there's a couple of things that make it. So again, syncopation being accenting or emphasizing the offbeats. Yeah. So we have 16th notes, and then we also have, what other kind of note is there? We have eighth notes and we have 16th notes, and there's another type of note that's present. 32nd note, yeah. And that 32nd note is really both the 16th note and the 32nd note give it that syncopated feel. And then maybe more important than anything is this area right here where you have this the and of beat 4 is accented, and it's directly followed by a rest. So it emphasizes that and even more. So how this sounds is, I'm just going to beatbox it, so bear with me. I need to make a recording, but this just sounds like. So, I mean, this is the early stages of syncopation. Now we're used to so much complex rhythms that really doesn't sound too complex to us. But at the time, I mean, that's pretty progressive. It really was. So again, that's 100 and some odd years ago. Jelly Roll Morton, the next guy in line to really contribute to jazz. He claimed he was the inventor of jazz. Pretty bold claim. He's there at the beginning, but he didn't invent it. He was the first to notate it, and he did this because he would move around from city to city. He'd go so he's born in New Orleans, raised there, played in the kind of brothels and stuff as a ragtime piano player, and then decided to just kind of hop around from city to city, went to New York, Chicago, Hollywood. And so jazz, remember, it's not known outside of New Orleans. It's really just a New Orleans phenomenon at this time. And he wants to play jazz, but nobody knows how. Not in New York and not in Chicago or Hollywood, not yet. So he teaches him how to play a little bit, and it becomes just a big hassle to try to teach him how to play jazz just by ear. They've never heard this music before, so he decides to write it down and notate it. And by putting it into notation, people are able to read it. If they could read music, right, they'd be able to do it within a few takes, just a little bit of practice, and then he kind of helps spread jazz by doing that. I mean, jazz is largely a non-notated type of music, especially in the early stages. When we get into swing jazz, the big band jazz in the 1930s, then it starts to get notated a little bit more. But it's just remember, improvisation is one of the key things. So you have this basic structure, and you're making it up, a lot of the stuff up as you go. So we give him credit for really being the first person to notate jazz, and he did a lot of things. He was a boxing promoter, things like that. I think he bred bulldogs, something. Yeah, just a very eccentric person. And then this guy here. So we have Louis Armstrong, and he he gets put away at a young age in this kind of juvenile center because he fired a gun into the air at New Year's night, right? So on right at the strike of midnight, he pretty much just fires a pistol in the air, and the cops just kind of cart him away and take him to this juvenile delinquent place. And he's only about, I mean, he's not even. I mean, I think he's around 10 years old, right? Maybe a little bit younger, maybe 8 or 7. But it's there at that juvenile center where he learns to really to really play the trumpet. They have a band there, and he joins the marching band, and really falls in love with the trumpet and becomes a master at playing it. Um, and he really looks up to King Oliver. So King Oliver is the most popular jazz musician at the time. He has the biggest jazz band of the time. And so at the time that he really starts to come of age, to be to and to leave that juvenile delinquent center, he wants to meet up with King Oliver. So at this time, that great migration occurs that we talked about, with the South just migrating to the northern areas, particularly Chicago. So we have all these Mississippi Delta blues guitarists going to Chicago, and then King Oliver he took his band from New Orleans up to Chicago as well, and he invites Louis Armstrong to be in his band. And this is a first in New Orleans jazz, because usually you just had one trumpet player. You would have a trombone player and one trumpet player. But Louis Armstrong made it two trumpet players, because King Oliver also played the trumpet. And then so for a while he's still playing in this New Orleans jazz style. So let's take a listen to New Orleans jazz, just so you can get it in your head and hear how this sounded like. So can anybody remind me what would be the one thing to the most important aspect of New Orleans jazz musically? That one component that makes New Orleans jazz what it is. Well, improv makes it. That's just all across jazz in general, and swing is also just kind of something that's all across jazz. But yeah, this is at the beginning. So those are two good answers. But a little bit more specific, we talked about the polyphonic. Yeah, polyphonic improvisation. So listen for the more than one melodies occurring. Let's see. And this is called the snake rag. This is King Oliver, and it's called the snake rag because, like I said, those melodies kind of snake in and out of each other. It's just kind of has that shape. So this is the group that Louis Armstrong joined, and then I'll play Louis Armstrong kind of by himself, or at least after we talk about how he completely changed what you're about to hear. All right. Yeah, Angela, he was from New Orleans. So that was King Oliver's band, King Oliver's Creole jazz band. And after a while, after Armstrong joined the band, he helped to what he wanted to focus on just one person, like, so just one just individual soloing, one person playing that main lead instead of having all of these melodies, just jumping around. His main contribution really was to not have that, just to have the focus on one person playing the solo. And Also, the swing feel. So somebody mentioned the swing feel. This he helps to kind of make this standardized in jazz, but also he has the help of a guy named Fletcher Henderson. But between them two, they really standardize the swing feel in jazz. So let's see if I can pull up a song that shows this move to individual soloing as opposed to the collective soloing. And this is him with Bessie Smith. He played with a lot of these early musicians. He played with Jimmy Rogers, Ma Rainey. And that song, St. Louis Blues, there's actually a movie made called St. Louis Blues that starred Bessie Smith. And this is way early. This is late 1920s, at least. She died at a very young age. Actually, well, it might have been 30s, because the Great Depression really stopped her career dead in its tracks. And then, not much longer after that, she got in that horrible car crash. Okay, so now in the 20s, also known as the Roaring Twenties, this is just before this is the time where America is still a little bit hopeful, and after the First World War, and kind of seems like following each of the world wars, America kind of prospers and is a little bit more optimistic. And this was just a booming decade for America at the time, and we identify this decade as being the jazz age, because this is when jazz really starts to explode, and it becomes even an international phenomenon. And what really kind of hinders the success of jazz in this decade to an extent, but it also was also one of the things that helped it to really succeed. It's kind of this ironic thing that happened is the Prohibition era, and we have this amendment, that the 18th Amendment, I think it says no alcohol is sold, no alcohol is bought or owned, and it put a lot of people out of business. Well, where are these jazz musicians playing? At these bars and at these clubs. So there's nowhere for jazz musicians to really to play or make money. Enter the speakeasy. So here's just just kind of a slideshow of what the speakeasies were. Um, so the Prohibition Amendment kicks into place. You see the cops just standing by. They're dumping out all the alcohol and the barrels of liquor, and it puts bars out of business, and a lot of other businesses as well. And you can see just the empty rooms here. What do we do? There's really, they're just kind of at this sort of standstill, not sure what to do. But then the demand of the people pretty much. And then, this is just the one slide that kind of, you see the people just lined up on the streets, thousands. And the havoc that the Prohibition caused was this slide doesn't really do it justice. This is just a kind of a simple protest, but um, just we learned that causes more damage than good. So what the demand is there, and we have the mafia. So they, being the kind of sly, sort of conniving people they are, see that the law has never really stopped them before. So if there's people, they see that many people are kind of protesting against that, then they communicate with these bar owners and these different clubs, and ask what can we do, what can happen, and they actually get in business with other places as well, and they leave the bars empty. The bars are still out of business because there's no the West Virginia moonshiners. So Angela, being from Beckley, is familiar with that. Yeah, and it's the same idea. What would happen is the mafia would make their own beer, and they would bootleg it, and and then they would smuggle it into these rooms that were hidden. You would walk into a clothing store, and in the back, kind of behind the dresses or whatever, would be this secret passageway into this lively party that's just kind of hidden, and in the back in this hidden room, completely secret. So that's why they're called speakeasies. You didn't speak about them. If you did so quietly. And the mafia would make their own alcohol and liquor, or they would find a way to get it, and then they would find a way to smuggle it into those speakeasies. And those speakeasies also had jazz musicians and jazz bands play there, and it was a prosperous time for jazz musicians, believe it or not, because of the speakeasies. They worked hand in hand, and this is how organized crime develops. It's out of this. How can we figure out how to systematically move this illegal thing, which is alcohol at the time, into this hidden room without being caught? Before this, the mafia was just like the Wild West, and there was really no rhyme or reason as to the things the ways that they did things. But now they have this system, this sort of organization that makes them kind of more just more focused, and it kind of is the start of organized crime in a way. So they get the drinks to the people, everyone's happy, and eventually the government realizes that really it was kind of a stupid thing to do. The demand was there, and they saw that all of the damage that it had done, and they actually repealed the 18th Amendment, the only time in history where an American amendment has been repealed. So farewell 18th Amendment, and that's the 20s in jazz, the jazz age. So the 30s, the swing era, that's what we call the swing era, and it lasts up until about 1950. But the 30s are really that's the decade for swing bands, also known as big bands. So why are they called big bands? Well, because the amount of musicians that you see here is just unprecedented. You have a full sax section, a full trombone section, a full trumpet section, plus a rhythm section. So we have almost 20 people here, maybe, give or take a few. And that's what you really need to listen for when identifying swing music and big band music. So it's the same thing: swing music, big band music. A huge ensemble. It's kind of like Western swing was last week. So they had a large ensemble. The big bands at this time have like I said, we got between 15 and 20 people, and they're playing. So if you look closer at this picture, they're reading straight from the music stands. So this is where music notation starts to kind of creep in and really make an impact on jazz, whereas before it was just kind of memory and improvisation. So now they're all playing in this written form. The soloist might improv. That might be, one of the only, and maybe some of the rhythm section, the members in the rhythm section. So the rhythm section is the drums, the piano, and the bass. And then later the guitar will be added to the rhythm section. So you might have some improvisation in those instruments, but mostly they're playing note for note as what's written on the page. So this is kind of this is during the Depression, and times are rough in America, and the economy's low, morale's low. So this music is going to be the opposite of that. It's going to be uplifting and upbeat, and it's going to kind of be this escapism through music and through dancing. So this is music to dance to. It's not music to really analyze and listen to closely. It's just kind of a feel-good music that makes people forget about all the trouble and all the problems that they're having because of the Depression. Let me go ahead and play an example of this. So here is Glenn Miller, and this is an example of big band or swing music. And so on. So that's going to be tested. You're going to be tested on that. And so most of these jazz styles you're going to be quizzed on. You should probably already be able to open the study guide. It tells you all the styles to listen to this week. And while I'm talking about it, I sent out an announcement today. So for those of you who are here, if you hadn't looked at the announcements yet, I was just pretty much saying that you shouldn't have had all 22 questions. You should have only been asked 10 questions out of the 22. We have this 22 question pool that we draw 10 questions from randomly, and those you should have just been asked 10 questions because we only give you 20 minutes to do it. And what I'm going to do is adjust your grades, just taking your 10 best answers. If you answer 10 or more out of 22 correctly, then you're gonna get 100, because you would have gotten 100 if you answered 10 questions how it was supposed to be anyway. And if you answered 8 right, you're gonna get an 80. If you answered 4 right, you're gonna get a 40. Because that's 4 out of 22. So that's just that. I apologize for that. So just to address that real quick. So now we have bebop. This is a reaction, or not necessarily a reaction to swing music, but it's more of the swing musicians, the best of the swing musicians, or the more, I guess, adventurous or what have you. Those musicians who are kind of wanting to explore the music a little bit more start to play in a more complex style. So we can see a couple of differences here. We have only 4 people in this ensemble, so we'll have a smaller group of musicians, nowhere near 15 musicians. So we're going to have 4 or 5 or 6 musicians who make up these small combos, these bebop ensembles. The music is more complex. It's more technical. This isn't really music to dance to. This is music to analyze and to kind of listen to deeply and think about it. So jazz or swing jazz was just to kind of dance to. Not to say that it's still great music, but this is kind of almost pushing the limits to what the musicians could play. So yeah, Daryl, I'm sorry I didn't address that question immediately. But again, when you have all your caps on like that, especially when you write a message with your cat with lowercase, it comes across as you're yelling and you're demanding an answer immediately. But I'm explaining something, and it's just, I mean, it's not the way to ask. I would get to it eventually. The assignment I was talking about was the listening assignment. I sent out an announcement today, the listening quiz. You should have only been asked 10 questions, but you were asked all 22, which was a mistake. So I'm going to curve the grades and um, so that your grade reflects just the best 10 answers, your best 10 answers. So with bebop, you have more complex music's faster. It's just people playing to the best of their abilities, and this is heavy improvisation too. So they're not reading anything. We don't see any music stands here. We just have these guys with their eyes closed and really focused and playing in a just a more complex way. So we have these virtuosic solos. That's really going to stand out when you hear bebop. You're going to hear just kind of a faster tempo with just very kind of, when you listen to bluegrass last week and you had the banjo, just think of that kind of complexity just being played on a saxophone or a piano or a trumpet. So now in bebop, the bass guitarist, this upright bass, he's pretty much going to play just this same kind of straight eighth note feel. He's keeping the beat. The drums, believe it or not, are not really the drums aren't keeping the beat as much as the bass is. He's walking up and down the bass neck, and he's just playing, not really repeating anything, just kind of playing within the scale, and those eighth notes that you hear on the bass is keeping the beat, and it kind of frees up the drummer to explore a little bit more. Whereas in swing jazz, the drums definitely kept the beat. You really didn't have a lot of room to kind of explore in swing jazz. So here's an example of bebop, and just compare this to what you heard with swing jazz. All right, so yeah, I played that whole song. It's kind of short, 2.5 minutes. So that's what we're asking you to listen for with bebop. It's most of the examples they're going to play is going to sound like that. Of course, there's other approaches to bebop, and once it gets into its later years of development, it'll lead into cool jazz, believe it or not, as a kind of reaction. So here's Charlie Parker, known as just the Bird, right? So I just want you guys to be familiar with him, to know his name, and associate him with bebop. That's really all I'm asking. It's Charlie Parker equals bebop. He was there at the beginning. And Dizzy Gillespie, his collaborator and friend, was also at the beginning of bebop. But Charlie Parker, if you want to kind of explore him more, maybe you can pick the bebop style for the project that's due next week. So cool jazz, it kind of grows out of bebop in a weird way, particularly with Miles Davis. He really didn't, this is before we knew what cool jazz was. He was writing in this more subdued way, but he was still using bebop forms, and he just kind of slowed everything down, and he made it more about the composition and the arrangement than the virtuosity and the performance. So he was trying to really be, I guess, technical with his writing, more so than his playing. And Chet Baker is he's someone who did something very similar. Now, Miles Davis had the album called "The Birth of Cool," and that's kind of the segue into cool jazz. And then Chet Baker comes along, and he's singing on his records as well. He's just playing these long, sustained notes that just kind of it's almost like a Frank Sinatra ballad, right? We have this kind of very slow, subdued type of music that could very easily just be background music. But the thing to take from this is that cool jazz just focuses on just longer notes. It focuses on the arrangement and the harmonies. So that's what they're trying to get technical with, is just the modulations from one key to the next, transitioning into those different modes, and just kind of creating a vibe and a mood. That was kind of their goal. Paul Desmond and Dave Brubeck. Dave Brubeck he's the one of the guys who played a version of O Susanna, a piano player, and then his longtime collaborator Paul Desmond is on the saxophone here, and they're more interested in toying around with the meter, with the time signature. So really, before they started to come up with these odd meters, jazz and popular music in general, it was either 4/4 or 3/4, or something very simple, 6/8. Those simple time signatures. With Dave Brubeck, we have 5/4 and 9/8 and 7/4, and they kind of bounce off of each other, and for a couple of measures you'll be in 5/4. The next measure you'll be in 9/8, and let me just play an example of him so you can hear that. This is Blue Rondo a la Turk, and it's about the subdivision as well, so you can kind of count it in different ways. All right, so I was saying you can kind of hear different meters in the subdivision, just depending on how you count it. So he was playing just kind of in a compound 6/8, 9/8 kind of vibe. Da 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 da. So it was like da 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 da, or it could be da 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 da. And he would do both. He would just accent different notes, different eighth notes. So so the accent would be every other eighth note when you're playing da 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 da, or every third eighth note when it goes da 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 da. And when you're doing that, it can sound like 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can really, time signatures is kind of subjective in a way. And it's a real important thing to determine what, if you're writing a piece of music, it's a real important thing to determine what time signature will work out best for you, what will make it more convenient, what will make it easier to write the music in. So you got to kind of think about it, and you might have to change it a couple of times. Should it be 3/4, or should it be 6/8, or should it be I don't know, 12/4? I mean, it just kind of, it makes sense as you move forward with the composition. But you'll find out, the more you do it, the more important the time signature is, because it just makes it easier for not only you to write, but also for the performers to perform and read. So just food for thought. So was Coltrane? Would he be cool jazz? Yeah, he. So a lot of these musicians went through different phases, and Coltrane was certainly one of those. And he started in the bop world, the bebop world, and then went into a cool jazz phase, and then transitioned into a modal jazz phase. And modal jazz just meaning switching from different modes. We have the sort of medieval modes, the Phrygian and the Mixolydian. So it's and that's just a different those types of modes or any mode is it's pretty much it's keeping the same notes or so you could say you're in the key of C, for example, and what you would do is just subtract maybe a couple of notes, or on you would start at a different place in the scale other than C. If we're in the key of C and we start on D and we use that as our tonic and we go all the way to the next D, then that would be an example of a Dorian mode. So the modes just kind of start at a different point in our standard major and minor scales. Okay, free jazz. This is kind of what it sounds like. It's just wide open and sometimes no structure at all and no predetermined form. You might have this basic idea of where the song is going to go, and then the rest is just largely improvised. So Ornette Coleman, just being the kind of fantastic technical player that he was, he auditioned for several ensembles and they were like, you're great, but you're not really what we're looking for. He was kind of too good and he was too I don't know, just too complex for some people. It's kind of like I don't know if you've heard the story about Primus's bass player auditioning for Metallica, and there's this interview with James Hetfield, and he's like, "No, you're too good. Do your own thing. You don't really fit in Metallica." So that's what Ornette Coleman went through, and he eventually developed this idea of just having basically just an all improvised, no sort of plan kind of jazz. But like I said, that would happen occasionally. You would still a lot of times you would play with those same musicians so much that you had this great chemistry that allowed you to kind of recognize and know where the music where each other's going. So there's some structure, but sometimes, like especially for Ornette Coleman in his early free jazz years, it would be no structure. Hard bop reacted to that, and they wanted to continue in the bebop tradition. Now these hard bop musicians were kind of they were like raised on rhythm and blues music. So we hear a lot of blues and gospel in hard bop, and you can hear that mainly in the piano. The piano is playing is kind of like an R&B sort of in a blues chord progression, and the rest of the musicians are I mean the whole it just sounds like R&B mixed with the jazz that we've heard before with bebop, but just a more subdued bebop. But the thing is to listen for the main thing to listen for is the blues kind of sound in the piano and maybe even in the sax. Think of it as Ray Charles playing in a jazz band. And I'll probably say the exact same thing Thursday when we talk about what to listen for in bebop. So Horace Silver and Art Blakely, there's the two names that you should kind of remember for the early stages of hard bop. But just reaction to free jazz, wanting to go back to a more simpler form of jazz, just being born and raised on rhythm and blues and gospel. So I'll go ahead and play an example of of hard bop just to kind of get it in your heads, and then Thursday we'll listen to some more hard bop, and you can actually listen to as much as you want. Just go by the playlist in the study guide for this week. But here's the Sidewinder by Lee Morgan. So, like I said, you can kind of hear Ray Charles in this, some just early rhythm and blues. That's it for right now. Let's just take a quick break, and then we'll come back and wrap it up with chapter 6. So just get up, stretch a little bit, and we'll meet back at about 9:20 or 9:30, so 9:30 or so. I'll just let this song play, and I'll go ahead and throw in a cool jazz song. So we didn't listen to any of that. So the next song will be Chet Baker with an example of cool jazz. So there's the link to the Sound Drop Room. If you have the app, then just click on that, and it should take you straight to it. And then we have Daryl asking, where does Thelonious Monk come in? He kind of made his name playing bebop. That was his deal for the at the beginning. And then transitioned into kind of a modal jazz, and then just went. He was one of those heavy experimenters in jazz music. So it's kind of hard to put him into any single pocket, but he did get his start in bebop. So I'll be back in a couple minutes. Okay, so just to wrap it up with a quick chapter 6 review, and I just want to mention a few important things, and then mainly some of the things that's going to come up on the lecture worksheet. So let me just go back to Emil Berliner, and let me say this, that he so this is going back to Emil Berliner and his gramophone. I forgot to mention that he didn't use Edison's patents when he was building his gramophone, because he didn't want to pay Edison any royalties. So he built his own. So just keep that in mind. Maybe write it down. Berliner made his own prototype without Edison's patents, so he didn't have to pay royalties. And then see, just one second here. Okay, sorry about that. And then the Great American Songbook, those songs were comprised of songs written by Tin Pan Alley songwriters. So a group of Tin Pan Alley songwriters were the main contributors to the Great American Songbook. All right, so just housekeeping out of the way. And then, okay, we mentioned how songwriters and band leaders were the stars in the first decades of the music industry, the popular music industry, and the recording industry, I should say. So at the beginning of the popular music recording industry, then it turns out that with people like Bing Crosby and then Frank Sinatra, the singers become sort of more important, or not necessarily more important, but just more famous, I guess, right? So kind of the same stage that we're at now. People know the performers more so than the songwriters, unless the songwriters are performing their own music, right? And this kind of happens with Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra. This is the beginning of the crooner style of singing, and we also call this swing pop. So they're taking elements from swing jazz and adding like a light orchestral sound to the background with some strings, maybe some light percussion, and using close microphone techniques, using the microphone um, as a to record their voice close up. And this was never possible before microphone technology. We had to sing really loud, even if we were close to the bell or to the input of those early recording devices. Uh, we had to be loud for it to translate and to be etched into the disc or into the tinfoil. Now there's a sort of issue with that as well, especially when you have things like the disc, the disc or whatever medium it is that's being recorded onto jumps around when you have a loud group of musicians. It might make the needle skip. It might bounce up the disc, things like that. So in some cases, you had to kind of play lightly, or just at the right volume to be recorded, but to not make the needle skip, or to make the whole machine just kind of jump and go out of sync. With microphone technology, with the close microphone, like you see here in front of Frank Sinatra, you're able to get as close as you want pretty much. And by doing that, you can sing softer, almost as soft as you want, and it's likened to whispering into like your maybe someone's ear or whatever. It's very intimate, and that's what they were going for. That was kind of their goal, was to achieve this sense of intimacy, and you could do that with these microphones that picked up very sensitive sounds. I need to clear out the sound drop room. I apologize for that. So these are the crooners. The first two big figures in the swing pop um, style of music, and then the Latin popular song forms. Just the three big figures here at the time: Rita Hayworth and Desi Arnaz, and then Sagar Kugat. But we'll talk about more of these styles in the listening review session. The mambo is this more energetic kind of big band Latin dance style, whereas the cha-cha-cha is kind of slowed down and more relaxed, with the scraper, or what's called the euro. That's where the cha-cha-cha gets its name. It just kind of sounds like cha-cha-ch, cha-cha-ch, and that's why they call it cha-cha-cha. But that's the kind of the main ingredient for the cha-cha-cha. But the rumba, the mambo are definitely like big band meets jazz, but it's not so much jazz as it is just this sort of regional Latin music, or this kind of Latin dance music. So I'm just going over a couple of different styles here, the popular styles in music in the 40s and the early 50s. So race to R&B. At first, just for a lack of a better term, starting with Mamie Smith's recording of Crazy Blues in 1920. Uh, Anything basically is recorded by someone who wasn't white was just lumped into this category of race music, and that's how they marketed it. They really didn't know what to call some of the styles of music that were emerging, so they just kind of called it race music, and that was that was a term that a lot of people had issue with, and it took a guy named Jerry Wexler, who worked for Atlantic Records, to really change that and say we should call this rhythm and blues. This is blues music essentially at its core. It's blues music with heavy rhythms, and we need to find a different term to really categorize what this music is. So rhythm and blues became the new term for the various blues incorporated genres. Barrel house and boogie woogie were piano-based styles of blues music. Barrel house was essentially nothing but blues, just played on the piano. Yeah, so all right, Daryl makes a good point that uh, Billboard Billboard categorizes music as race music, and then we see that reflected on Billboard when Jerry Wexler suggests that it should be called R&B. So we see that also being reflected on the Billboard charts. So excellent, yeah, excellent point, Daryl. Very good. Barrel house is just blues played on the piano, whereas boogie woogie has more of a defined sound, and we'll discuss the style characteristics on Thursday. I guess the main thing to take away tonight is that boogie woogie is defined by the boogie bass line, and that's just built around the 1-4-5 progression, and it's one of the most common bass lines that we'll hear. It'll be immediately recognized once you hear it. You'll definitely recognize it as soon as you hear a boogie bass line, which is something that's in your playlist in your study guide. And then also, again, we'll talk about this on Thursday just to give you a clear picture of boogie woogie and how that was incorporated into early rock and roll and even into the jump blues bands that I think we'll talk about here. So boogie woogie, it starts off as essentially just a piano-based music type of music with that boogie woogie bass line. I can't really sing it that well, but let's see. I can go ahead and throw something in here because you guys should, I should play an example of boogie woogie just to get it on your brains. Let's see. All right, I think this is. Yeah, so boogie woogie right here. I completely forgot to push play on the slides. I'll fix that in the archive. So before boogie woogie, I talked about race records and R&B. The Latin music stars Rita Hayworth, Desi Arnaz, and Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra. So you didn't miss too much. I apologize. I'll fix that for the archive. So that boogie bass line will find its way into jump blues, and jump blues is essentially boogie woogie with added instrumentation. So now we have a drummer and a bass player and a saxophone player. Um, but that boogie woogie bass line is going to be there in jump blues, and that's going to be the style of music that segues into rock and roll. That's essentially early rock and roll music. If you think about rockabilly, which we talked about last week, it's jump blues without the saxophone and with just a guitar kind of taking the place of the saxophone. And that's so rockabilly is kind of jump blues in a way. Little Richard is jump blues with some of his early songs. And also, speaking of Little Richard, we have this other style that you see here, the shouters, who came from this gospel tradition where the preachers kind of had like the fire and brimstone shouting style of preaching, and that carried over into the singing. And Big Joe Turner was one of the early shouters, and Little Richard kind of incorporated both of these, jump blues and shouters, and helped to develop early rock and roll. And then Les Paul and the magnetic tape. So I talked about how a lot of the technology that helped to start the recording industry was taken from technologies that were developed in other countries, and that's tape recording technology is a great example of that. The magnetophone or the magnetophone was a German invention, and it was kind of constructed under the Hitler regime in World War II. And in fact, Hitler used this to make it appear like he was at a live concert, at a live opera or something. So before magnetic tape, you had recordings on records, and you would have these breaks in between sections of music because you had to flip the record to continue the music. So you'd have these little pauses in the music, but with tape it could go on continuously without any breaks or pauses. And when people heard an opera broadcast from a certain radio station, they thought that it was a live performance. And Hitler would actually broadcast operas or long pieces of music at radio stations, empty radio stations, because he knew that they could potentially be bombed, and would be somewhere completely different. So it was just kind of a decoy to give the illusion that he was at this. Well, actually, it was at. So he gave this illusion that he was at a concert, right? Not the radio station, but at a concert. Um, can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, something. What about now? Is that better? All right, so my headphones must have, yeah, I don't know. I unplugged my headphones and it stopped hissing. So anyway, yeah, he would broadcast these operas from a radio station, but it made it seem like he was at a concert, and just kind of threw everybody off. But Les Paul, the guy who we probably know as the creating Les Paul guitars, also was an innovator in sound recording, and specifically multi-track recording. So before there was such a thing as multi-track recording, he used the same tape head to overdub, right? So he'd use the same track to just make layers on top of, which is called sound on sound. So you need to understand the difference between sound on sound and multi-track recording. Sound on sound is using the one track to layer parts onto, and multi-track recording is having multiple tracks to record simultaneously. and he did both. He pioneered both of those. So just a couple slides left. I just want to get through these last couple of points that are going to show up on your worksheet. Atlantic Records, started by Ahmet Ertegun, and then also Jerry Wexler, who I mentioned, became a close associate for Atlantic Records with Ertegun. And we have these two figures on the right. We got Ray Charles, and then we got Ruth Brown. So Ray Charles was Ruth Brown's piano player before kind of breaking out into his own very successful solo career. Ruth Brown she was known as kind of like or Atlantic Records used to be called the house that Ruth built, because she really is the person responsible for getting Atlantic Records off the ground and becoming the most successful independent record label of all time, and that's a fact. So here's just a list of post World War II changes. 33 1/3 and the 44 RPM replace the outdated 78. So if you can get your hands on a 78, then hold on to it because they're rare, and they're becoming even more rare. So especially those older ones, you can probably get some newer 78s that might be put out today, but if you can find some older 78s, hold on to them. But this is, just take note of this list here. Smaller niche labels. So we have labels that focus on specific styles rather than trying to do it all. That becomes important. And then we talked about radio, and then the teens with disposable income. Like I said at the beginning of the lecture, American households following the wars, the two world wars, experienced times of prosperity, especially after World War II, which is where we are right here. And teens were given a greater allowance than ever before, and families had more leisure time. They didn't have to work all day just to pay the bills. They could work less hours and be able to maybe have enough money to give their kids, and those kids bought records. So just to lead in, to give you something to think about before we get to next week, you might want to take a screenshot of this slide. This is the final slide of the night, and it just shows how all the different styles that we've talked about so far will come together to create one important style of music, and that's rock and roll. So rock and roll is not this standalone style of music that it just comes out of nowhere. It uses elements from each of these, from boogie woogie, country, gospel, rhythm and blues, and electric blues, and folk music, and more. And that's what essentially creates rock and roll. So we call it this rock and roll confluence. Little typo here. I'll fix that. But that's the end of the class. So thanks for sticking around. I'll take any questions if you have any. Otherwise, I'll work on the archive and try to get that up for you as soon as possible.